So, have you ever thought about what you would like your last words to be? It can be a thing, can't it? The very last thing you say before you are promoted to glory. Have you ever thought about the last thing you want to say to people before you go? Here's some. If you've not thought about it, here's some ideas. Here's what some famous people have said just before they died. So Ludwig van Beethoven said this: "Applaud, friends, the comedy is finished." Bob Hope, his wife said to him, "Bob, where would you like to be buried?" The last thing he said before he died was, "Surprise me." Voltaire was encouraged to renounce the devil as part of the last rites, and he said this: "My good man, now is not the time for making enemies." Rameau, a wonderful French composer, just before he died, the priest who was with him started to sing, and he said to him, "What the devil are you meaning to sing, man? You are out of tune." Karl Marx's housekeeper said to him, "And what are the last words you want to say?" And Karl Marx said, "Get out. Last words are for fools who've not said enough already." Marie Antoinette, the last thing she said was this: "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it intentionally," because she'd just trodden on the foot of her executioner. Oof, wow, that's a kind of a provocative act, isn't it? Leonardo da Vinci, this is ridiculous. Can you just think about all the amazing things Leonardo da Vinci did, like painting the most famous painting in the world, designing the helicopter, all those kind of things. Leonardo da Vinci said this before he died: "I have offended God and I've offended mankind because my work has not reached the quality that it should have done." Like there's somebody who needed to do a little bit more work on his self-esteem, a sense of what he could bring to the world. Winston Churchill, just again, think of all the incredibly interesting parts of history Winston Churchill was involved in. And he said this before he died: "I am bored with life." Oscar Wilde said, "Either that wallpaper goes or I do." And the wallpaper didn't get changed. And Joshua, son of Nun, said, "Choose for yourselves this day who you will serve." Choose for yourself this day who you will serve. We've had a brief look at the life of Joshua, and now we've all too soon come to this farewell. And you'll know from this overview we've been doing of some of the big characters in the Old Testament, there's often a kind of their farewell speech as a significant thing. They kind of sum up some of their life. They're giving the next generation what they think they need to know. Actually, Joshua's farewell is very similar to Moses, although the difference is that Moses is pretty much the whole of the book of Deuteronomy, whereas Joshua is this chapter we've just heard most of, chapter 24, and also chapter 23, the one before from the book of Joshua 2. When I think about, well, I don't really think about what I'm going to say before I die, but if I were to think about what I was going to say before I died, I'm particularly drawn to the idea of a one-liner that's going to make everybody giggle just before I croak it. However, Joshua is much better than me, and he's giving them all of this kind of blessings. He's blessing the people. He's giving them his hope for them as they go forward. He's passing on his best wisdom and his best warnings too. Joshua's speech is actually a renewal of the covenant between God, who loves these people, and these people who are learning to love their God. And so he's saying to them, saying to the people, you need to keep turning to God. You need to remember how good he has been to you. And you need to make sure you don't give your heart to anybody else but him. Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. I have two questions from that verse, okay? Can you hear the two questions? Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. The two questions are, why would I need to choose? Okay? And the second one is, why would I serve and love and worship God? Yeah? So those are the two questions for my sermon today. Why do I need to choose? And then, why would I choose to love and serve and worship God? So first of all, why would we need to choose? Well, because there are all sorts of other things vying for our attention all of the time. It seems to me that the witness of the Bible is that if we don't choose to serve God, we will end up giving our lives away to other things that are less than God. Bob Dylan said, famously, you've got to serve somebody. It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, but you've got to serve somebody. Now, Bob Dylan, that was his black and white new Christian phase. But what an interesting thought. If you don't serve God, you're going to end up serving something else. How do you feel about that idea? I strongly feel that it's true. It's almost as if we've got in our DNA this drive to seek and worship God, this drive for something transcendent, for something bigger than ourselves. And actually, if we don't find a way of kind of turning those compulsions upon God, they'll end up playing out somewhere else in our hearts and in our lives. It seems to me that we are made for spiritual food, nutritious spiritual food. But if we're not careful to choose that, then we'll end up drifting into marshmallows instead. Joshua is unpacking this when he talks about idol worship. So he says to the people, he says it several times in that passage actually, you need to throw away the gods of your ancestors and you need to serve the Lord. Don't get caught up in worshipping the gods of this people, the land in which you're going into. You need to serve the Lord. Now, it seems to me pretty obviously, Joshua is not talking about other religions in the way that we think about them today. You know, these great other belief systems, global religions all over the world. Joshua is talking about these carved figures. Literally carved out of wood figures, or sometimes made out of metal. These carved figures that people would have, and they would pray to them, and they would ask them for help. They would honor them in kinds of worship with incense and things like that. A bit like, do you remember the story of Aaron and the golden calf? A bit like that. It's an idol. It's a physical object that you call your God and worship and ask for help. So when Joshua is saying, throw away the gods of your ancestors, I don't think that means don't get too friendly with the Buddhists or the Muslims. I think what he's saying is, take those weird carved things you've got that you place your hope in and put them in the recycling, because you don't need them anymore because you've got God on your side. Yeah? So the point I think Joshua is saying is, your God is of a totally different order than those idols that you knew about before. And to turn back to those idols, to place your hope in them would just be nonsensical. Why would you place your hope in inanimate objects when you have access to the God of heaven and earth? If Joshua was speaking to us today, if Joshua was saying to us, you need to choose God above everything else in your life and in your world, what would Joshua ask us to throw away? What would Joshua ask us to throw away? Probably not our carved images. I'm not aware of any of you devoting a lot of time to carved images. Probably not those things. But Joshua might invite us to throw away anything which wants us to trust it, anything that wants us to love it or obey it or identify ourselves with it, instead of bringing those needs and impulses to God. What kind of idols might Joshua invite you to throw away? Maybe the idol of success and achievement. Because success, sometimes we look to our success to give us a sense of our worth. We look to achievements to tell us who we really are. And in those ways, those take the place of God, who actually tells us who we are. He tells us that we're beloved children of God. Success is a good thing. Success is a gift. But success makes a poor God. Maybe Joshua would ask us to throw out our dependence upon success, our looking to success to give us validation, show us who we really are. Maybe another idol would be money and materialism. And so we've got this idea that if I'm financially secure, then everything will be okay. Well, that kind of language, that's a bit like salvation language, isn't it? If I've just got enough money, then I'm going to be safe. And so sometimes in pursuing more money or pursuing financial security, we might sacrifice our relationships in order to get it. We might sacrifice even our integrity in order to get more money and more things and feel more secure. Joshua might ask us to throw out the idol of popularity, by which we live for the praise of others. And I think we probably all know that social media especially disciples us into this idea that how popular we are is what really matters. That's what our value really depends on. That's where our salvation comes from. But if that's the idol that we have, then we end up totally at the mercy of comparison with others, or we end up constantly afraid of rejection. Or we end up wanting to, instead of be who we really are, always needing to spin a particular image or being really concerned with who's affirming us. In fact, I think probably Joshua, if he asked them to throw out their carved images, I think he would ask us to throw out those things of about the same size. We call them smartphones, and we are devoted to them, aren't we? Anything like that distracts us, that fritters away our attention. It's that little thing that you want to keep picking up and caressing it and listening to it, because it's going to ping you with messages of love and wisdom all day long. I'm convinced Joshua would want us to throw those things out. Or maybe our wounds are our idols. Maybe our wounds are our idols. Others really have hurt us, have betrayed us. But instead of us wanting to find a way to be healed, our wounds become like this sacred object in our hearts and in our lives. We feel like we've got to keep picking at the scabs, making sure that we hurt enough for them. I'm going on with myself, but are you kind of following the logic here? Yeah? When you read this passage, don't think about carved images. Think about what in my heart and in my life has the potential to take the place of God, or is already taking the place of God. What am I placing my hope in? What do I think is ultimately going to save me? And if it's anything less than God, then here's your opportunity to think about it. Do we have idols? What are we trusting in? What do we love? What do we fear more than God? Do we have sacred objects in our hearts? Or what would we sacrifice ourselves for that's less than God? The gift of this passage, I think, is it tells us we don't have to fritter away our lives. We don't have to fritter away our hope on those things. The gift of this passage is it tells us we can be free of that. We can choose what we're going to serve. We can choose that we're going to serve God. We can throw away our idols and we can turn to him who is the God of all life. Now, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. It will take choosing to live differently. And sometimes it feels like the whole world around us is placing hope in all sorts of other things, and we can just get swept up in that. And I think Joshua is saying to us, you're not going to follow God by default. You can't just drift into choosing God. You don't follow him on autopilot. You choose to love and serve God. It's an act of your will. And then he goes on to say, this might feel undesirable to you. This might be too tough for you. And then he says this, even if the whole world followed a different way, me and my homies, we're going to serve the Lord. Well, actually says me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Even if everybody else is going off somewhere else. No. I've seen something good in God, and I'm going to follow him. I choose to follow him. I choose to love him and to worship him. Do you mind if I just go off on a little diversion and then come back again? No. Good. Not many of you were giving me permission, but I'm going for it anyway. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's quite a famous verse, isn't it? Sometimes people put that in their hallway in their house, don't they? Have you done that? Have you got it in your house? No, but some of you have. Yeah. I just want to say it is a wonderful verse, but sometimes it might trip you up. That's my little diversion. I just want to talk about the fact that it might trip you up. It might trip you up because you put it up and then you think, I really do mean my whole household needs to serve God. And then you have teenagers and you go, oh, seems I can't make them do what I said I was going to do with them, okay? I just want to give you permission to let go of that, okay? And the same again, you might have people come and stay at your house. I've had people ask me this a few times recently, actually. There's a couple coming to stay at my house and they're not married. Should they share a bedroom? It's that same kind of question. Everything that happens under my roof needs to be in line with what I think God is saying. I just want to say, take the pressure off that. Do you know? When Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, he's living in this ridiculously patriarchal society where the man of the house decided what everybody else thought and believed. Yeah? We do not live in that world anymore, do we? No, we don't. One of my daughters just gave a funny look then. I don't think we live in that world where the man of the house gets to decide what everybody else thinks and believes anymore. Because actually, I think we've learned that good leadership is ensuring that everybody gets the freedom to believe and do the things that they think they should do, that's before God and before their conscience. Does that make sense? So rather than good leadership saying, this is what you need to believe, I think it's saying you have the freedom and the space to make choices, and I'm not going to break off relationship with you because you don't make the choice that I think you should do. Yeah? Gosh, I went off and back a bit longer than I meant to, but anyway, the point is, I think this is the point of what Joshua is saying. I think he's saying, I mean, it's rhetorical really, even if all of you went off, I'm still committed. I'm still going to follow God. And I think we want to say, whatever else is going on around us, whatever else the people around us are deciding to do, we're going to follow Jesus. We're not going to turn back. Everybody else might be getting distracted, but no, I'm going to follow him. I'm not going to get swept away in the tide of the culture around us. Even if everybody else placed their hope somewhere else, I'm going to hope on Jesus. I'm going to follow him because in him is real life. Because the way of Jesus is really soul food, because life in him is rich and glorious. Paul says this, these are the words we read at the beginning actually. Paul said that he talked about God's good and pleasing and perfect will. And these are the words from Romans 12. I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, because this is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. And isn't this such a beautiful idea? That God's will for each of us is his good and pleasing and perfect will. You don't have to serve the grindstone. You don't have to dance to somebody else's tune. You don't have to conform your heart and your desires to those of the world around you. You don't have to pick up and follow all the expectations and the norms of our culture. You don't have to always do what you've always done. You also don't have to think what you've always thought. You don't have to feel what you've always felt. You can begin to find freedom from all of those things as you choose to serve Jesus. We don't have to choose to fall back on those answers that we had in the past, which are only partial answers. We don't have to measure ourselves up to the people around us. But instead, we can choose Jesus, and that means being determined to consider what's shaping me. What am I becoming? Who am I becoming? Where am I investing my heart? What are my habitual thoughts, my habitual desires? Where are they taking me? And turning all of those to Jesus. Is that kind of landing with you? Is that making sense? I remember when I was first a youth worker, one of my young people came to me and said, I want to follow Jesus, but it just feels like so much less life. It feels so much a narrower life. All these things I've got to give up. Actually, I don't think it works like that. The more and more I think about it, I don't think that's how it works. I think as we choose to say yes to Jesus, as we choose to serve him, we're suddenly opened up to a much, much richer life. We're suddenly set free from a whole bunch of things we maybe didn't even realize were controlling us in all sorts of unhelpful ways. Joshua says to us, serve God, because he is the real treasure. And that's where he is where abundant life is found. So, I was asking you two questions. Why do we need to choose? And second, why would we love and worship and serve God? Yeah? So all of that was my answer to the first question. This is why we need to choose, okay? I'm pleased to say the answer to my second question is going to be much, much shorter. Joshua's answer to the second question comes in the first half of the chapter. And so he spells out to the people, this is all that God has done. And his argument is, look, if you just remember all that God has done for you, it's a very logical, rational choice to serve him. And so he talks about Abraham, said Abraham has no life, but God brought new life to him, and you are the result of that new life. He talks about Moses and Aaron who have set people free from Egypt, and you are the people who've been set free, and then you've been brought into this land, and he's driven out the nations from this land so that you can make your home here. And we've talked in the last 2 weeks about the driving out the nations is problematic, so I won't do that again today, but go back and listen to what we said the last 2 weeks if you want to. And then he's saying, and all of these things that God has done, none of it depended on you. None of it was your effort. None of it was because you were worthy. He did it for you because he's gracious and he chose you. So verse 13, this is Joshua speaking the words of God now. He says, I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build, and you live in them, and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. That's quite profound, actually, I think. God says, I've given you this life for which you did not toil, cities you did not build, and you live in them, and you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. What does that say to us? I think it says we didn't even deserve to be born. We did nothing special in order to be given life. We did nothing in order to earn our salvation, and yet we find ourselves in this wild and wonderful world of joy and food and friendships and sunshine. The whole of our life is a gift. Every moment of our life is held in God's grace. And none of that depends on how good you are or how successful you are. It's all on the basis of God's love. It's all on the basis of what God has done for you. You just look at it all. Just look at all that you've received. And this God who's given you life and given you so much, he wants to know you, and he wants to love you, and he wants to hear your prayers, and he wants to fill you with his spirit, and he wants to grow you in your gifts. He wants to grow your heart. He's the great love behind all of that. Why don't you lift your hearts to him? Why don't you learn who he is? Why don't you learn how to love him? Because in him we live and move and have our being. And again, if Joshua was speaking those words to us, he wouldn't be saying, the reason you need to love and serve God is because of Abraham and Moses. I mean, he might say that briefly, but he'd go on to say, you love and you serve and you worship God because look what he's done for you in Jesus. Look at the forgiveness and redemption that's been given to you in Jesus. Look how Jesus has come amongst you to show who God the Father really is and to lead you back to the Father's heart. Look how Jesus has taken your sin onto himself and given up his life so that you can be saved. Look how Jesus has opened your heart up to him, to God, and to others too. And look at his promise that he's with you even till the end of the age, that he's given you life and given you new life freely. How do we respond to all that God is and all that God has done for us? Well, in verse 23, it said this. Yield your hearts to the Lord, or incline your hearts to the Lord. And then in the previous chapter, verse 11, be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. You see, there are so many reasons to yield our hearts to God. There are so many reasons to carefully follow and love God. Are you with me? We get to choose who we love and who we serve. And God is ultimately worthy of our love. I started with thinking about our farewell, our final words. Who are you going to say farewell to this week? I don't mean that you're going to die, hopefully. But in all of your different encounters, who are you going to say farewell to? And in every encounter, what do you hope to leave those people with? I think of the people I might encounter this week. And in this, I want to be a bit like Joshua. As I say farewell to people, I want to have left them with a clearer sense of who God is, of how good life really is, of the goodness of God who's poured his life and his love upon us. I'd like them to know more clearly that this God is totally worthy of love and devotion, and that he really can, as we give our hearts to him, that really will be a thoroughly good life. As I say farewell to people this week, I'd like them to have a clearer sense of their own agency, their own ability to choose life. And that as they choose life with Jesus, then that might be life which is more true and more real and less vacuous and fake. And I pray for you too, in all of the people, all of the encounters you have with people this week, that as you say farewell to people, they might glimpse God and how good he is and the goodness of life. They might have a clearer sense of how free God wants them to be and how much richer their life could be as they lift their eyes and their heart and their worship and their love to him. Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. Shall we pray? And then Abby's going to come and lead us in communion. Loving God, we pray that you would pour your Spirit out upon us. You'd shine light upon us. You'd lead us into all truth. And particularly, I pray for those of us who, this morning, we've just become more aware of the things that are distractions in our lives, the things that we have ended up placing our hope in, seeking life from, which we realize are less than you and aren't helpful. Would you help us to turn our hearts and our lives to you, the giver of all good gifts? Would you help us to see more clearly your goodness, particularly for those of us who we're not quite sure this morning? Would you remind us who you are? Would you show us your great love? Would you open up our hearts that we might love and serve and worship you? And we pray, loving God, that you might do some of those things as we celebrate this meal, as we share in bread and wine. Amen.